Warning, listening to this show may result in increased levels of inspiration, motivation, and innovation. Side effects can include the immediate urge to take massive action to build a better business and life for yourself and others. You've been warned. Welcome to Influencers Radio with your host, Jack Mize.
And welcome back to another episode of Influencers Radio. Coming up in April is World Autism Awareness Month. And I thought that it would be just perfectly appropriate and special if we could have someone that is really deep into this community and doing something with this community come on and talk about autism, because the fact is it's coming out as people are aware of the term autism, but I think it's still one of the most misunderstood things out there. When you see it in the news, you see it in the media, and you see the word, and it seems to apply to such a huge range of situations. So that's why I have invited the founder and the CEO of the Global Autism Project, which is an international nonprofit organization that she started while living and working in Ghana, West Africa, 13 years ago. And what they do is they train communities around the world to understand and accept people with autism. So I am proud to have today on Influencers Radio, Miss Ola Pinney. Welcome to the show, Molly.
Thank you so much. Thrilled to be here. Awesome.
Well, I'm thrilled for you to be here, especially for World Autism Awareness Month. And I want to really kind of focus this show on autism awareness. And I think that's the big part of this is awareness. So if we could, let's kick off with that. And I know you coming up on April 1st is actually World Autism Awareness Day, right? And you're going to be speaking at the UN on this?
Yeah, absolutely. It's a day that's been recognized by the UN for the past 6 years now. And so this is an exciting year here at the Global Autism Project, because we are going to be addressing the entire group of people who are there gathered that day for World Autism Awareness Day. So it should be an amazing day.
Well, let's start with that. You know, obviously the world is in the beginning of that World Autism Awareness. And I think a lot of people, when we see autism in the media, it's very much talked about in the sense of developed countries, especially in the U.S. And I think one of the first times I ever was aware of it was back in, with the movies like Rain Man, right? But you see so many different, the term applied to so many different levels of people and what they are able to do, what they're capable of doing, and sometimes some extremely extraordinary things. Let's start with defining kind of what autism is, versus the popular perception or misconception of autism, and then we'll talk about how it's affecting people worldwide.
Sure. Yeah. Autism is a developmental disorder. And as you said, we talk a lot about the autism spectrum, right? And so there are people at different ends of the spectrum. Sometimes when people come to our office here in New York, they're surprised to see that we actually have 3 men with autism who work here in our office in New York. So really, I think, when I was living in Ghana and learning more about autism and autism in the community, I think that one of the biggest divides was sort of between what we know is possible for people with autism and what the local community knew was possible for people with autism, because it's absolutely a spectrum, and these guys have tremendous potential.
Well, I think that the difference, that the between the potential and what people perceive as the potential, I think is probably a huge contrast, even in developed countries. In the U.S., I think when people see people with autism, they may not realize that full potential of what they're capable of. And I imagine that's probably an exponential factor in other parts of the world when people don't understand or even, know the definition of autism. What is that gap usually that you've seen between what people, perceive as people with autism, their potential versus what they really truly are capable of?
Well, I think the important thing to know is when we're talking about the potential of a person with autism, it does require that person is taught, that they're taught in a way that they're able to learn. What our organization does is we train specifically in applied behavior analysis, which is a very, very effective, powerful teaching methodology. And I think, in the places that we work, there's a lot of locally accepted beliefs around what autism is. And it can be tremendously challenging, right? Because we actually don't know what causes autism. But to give you an example, in some parts of the world, the locally accepted belief is that the children are possessed, or they are this way because of bad spirits, or because they've upset ancestors. And I think the thing to know too is that we have theories, that aren't necessarily rooted in any science floating all over the U.S. too, right, about what causes autism. And so when we talk about the potential, that's really the work that our organization does, right, is creates not only the teaching programs for the kids who have autism to learn, but also brings an awareness to the community around what's possible for these kids.
And I think that's what, at least in my eyes, makes what you do unique and truly an influencer in this realm, is the fact that, and I want to make sure and put a spotlight on that we don't, overlook that, is the fact that you do, the training, like you said, with the people with autism, you work with them. But I think the other part, that I think is really important and probably has a huge, effect on not just the people with autism, but their families and the communities they live in, is the fact that you do train those communities about how to understand and accept people with autism. And I know those are words, but that's a pretty big concept. How do you teach people or train communities on acceptance? I mean, we try to do that with a lot of areas right here in the U.S. and in so many different realms. But how do you train people on acceptance of autism, and to understand when they do start with that belief that it's even as extreme as possession or something like that?
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great question. And it really goes back to our model, right? So in our model, we actually partner with local people around the world who are already working with individuals with autism. And we train those people to be highly effective in doing that work. In terms of the awareness, it can be a slow burn in a way, right? And the acceptance component, right? But what ends up happening is when families are able to communicate with their child for the first time, when teachers are able to communicate with their child for the first time, when individuals with autism are able to express their needs, it becomes easier to accept them. And I think it is something, I started the Global Autism Project 13 years ago, and, our vision is really of a world where all people with autism can reach their potential and be accepted by their community. And I get that that's maybe not going to happen in this lifetime, right? And so our job is really to build capacity, to create communities around these people. And that's how we do that.
Well, and there's a tremendous undertaking, that, and the fact that you are doing that with the knowledge that you may not actually see it come to fruition in your lifetime is remarkable that you've put so much into this.
Well, we see little pockets of acceptance popping up, right? We have an awesome project, completely led by our local partner. That project started out as one teacher and two students, and now, I think they're serving 30-something students now.
Oh, wow.
So
and
it's really,
that? And where is
that? That's in Nairobi, Kenya.
Okay. So, let's talk about the international side of this. Okay.
Sure.
Because I know if I'm watching TV and I hear something about autism, or I'm watching something, it usually is something based in the U.S. or the UK, and they're usually profiling a particular person with a particular extraordinary gift or something like that, and it usually is in that, I'd even say, English-speaking developed countries. How many people would you estimate, if there is a clear number, would land on the spectrum of autism worldwide?
Well, it's an interesting question. The latest statistics here in the U.S. is that 1 in 68 individuals have autism. And when we extrapolate that, we estimate 70 million people worldwide, and 85% of them living in developing countries. And people often ask me, how'd you get those numbers? What are those numbers? And the really important thing to know is that in a lot of the countries where we work, the awareness of autism is so incredibly low that we can't possibly diagnose and find all of these people with autism. So that is an estimate. And I'll give you an example in Ghana where I started this organization. There were 20 million people at the time. There were 30 pediatricians, and there was one diagnosing autism. So I think, the statistics can be a little difficult for us. At our organization, it's sort of like if there's one kid in that country who needs us, there's got to be more, and let's figure it out and build a community there. But again, 70 million people with autism, 85% in developing countries.
Yeah, that is just a shocking number to me. When you think about that percentage that is out there. And what is it that because I know autism faces scrutiny that a lot of other causes don't, and a lot of the scrutiny, I guess, is I don't know what you'd call it, the subjectivity of the diagnosis, right?
Sure. Yep.
And so there's a spectrum that you mentioned that I guess can be fairly wide. Is there a certain area of that spectrum that you kind of focus on that kind of gives you the most people that you can help, that you have the ability to help, and maybe that subjectivity of diagnosis isn't scrutinized as much?
Yeah, that's a really interesting question. So in a lot of the countries where we work, certainly initially, we tend to work with the people who are more affected, who are on the more affected end of the spectrum, simply because these are the people for whom families are identifying there's an issue here, right? If someone's on the more kind of mild end of the spectrum, that's not a cause for alarm in these communities, right? It's if these are children who are nonverbal, by the age of 7 or 8. And actually, there's a really interesting thing that occurred in India where we work, where when we first started out, the youngest kids we were working with were, 7, 8 years old. And it took a couple of years to start what we know as early intervention, which is to set up a program for the 2 and 3-year-olds in that community. Because at that time, the awareness wasn't there to say, if you have a 2 or 3-year-old who's not speaking, that's problematic and you should seek help. That has changed, because our partners there are incredible, because they're working day in and day out, creating, doing awareness campaigns, creating programming, and just really building an excellent program for the community affected by autism.
And, so when you work with the family like this, especially in these developing countries, how accepting are the families? Because I know in the U.S. or in developing countries, you automatically think that, the parents are going to be there. The parents are behind and want to do whatever they can for that child and to enhance that child's life and hit that potential. But like you said, the acceptance and even the fact that it's not even understood in a lot of these countries. Do you find that there's a challenge in even getting their families to accept and understand what the situation is?
I think everywhere that I've ever been in the world, parents tend to want very much the same thing for their kids, right? They want them to be independent. They want them to be happy. That said, unfortunately, in some of the places where we are, some of the kids are often orphans, that the parents have not known what to do. They've had no idea what to do to help their child. And unfortunately, these children end up in orphanages often. Now, that said, we've had situations where we've started working with a child who has either been given to relatives or in an orphanage, and the parents have come back around and they've created a relationship with that child once that child gets services and learns how to communicate and learn some skills. So it's an excellent question. I think, parents all over the world tend to want the same thing for their kids. and it can be a pretty desperate situation. If you're in a situation and you don't know what's going on with your child, you don't know how to talk about it, you don't have people around you who believe you, that can be tremendously challenging.
Well, I think I completely understand the global nature of this. There's a lot of people, and sometimes understandably so, they think, well, we have problems with the people in our country, right? We have people here, why are we doing this globally? Why are you in Africa doing this type of stuff? And I completely see why, the people globally are just incredibly fortunate to have someone like you, in a very unfortunate situation, that they're in. What is it that made you decide to start? I know you talked about, you started this back when you were living in Ghana in West Africa. What was that, 13 years ago?
It was. All of a sudden, it was 13 years ago.
So what is it that sparked this, that this is what you needed to do, and you needed to take it, to put that word global in front of it is a really big task to break off there.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and you should know it started for a few minutes as the Ghana Autism Project. What happened is I moved with a family to Ghana. The father was originally from Ghana, and they were moving there to do a project there. They had a child with autism here in the U.S. And when I got there, people started showing up at my house looking for the woman who knew what autism was. Word got out very quickly that there was someone in this community who could help the families affected by autism. Through those people, I met an incredible woman who had started an autism center. And I just began volunteering my time there as much as possible. And, I realized a couple of things. One, I'm not going to be in Ghana for the rest of my life. Two, I was a first year therapist at that point. I'm certainly not the person who should be doing this training, and so I went online, and granted, I always give the disclaimer, this was 2003 on a dial-up internet connection in West Africa. So it's possible that this wasn't the most efficient connection. But I went online and started to look for somebody who could come to Ghana, who could help us, who could do the training. And there were two things that I really found. One was that there were communities all over the world who were looking for this exact same thing. And the other thing that I realized is that there was no organization set up. There was nothing that existed that would get people to not only come to Ghana and train us for 2 weeks, but to stay and to build a relationship with us, because it doesn't take 2 weeks to learn how to work with kids with autism, right? And so that's why, first of all, it went from being the Ghana Autism Project to the Global Autism Project very quickly. But it's also very much the reason that we have the model that we have. We build a 5 to 7 year partnership so that we can really create a partnership, build a partnership, and leave those guys in a much, all of our partners in a much, much, much better place than they were. And I'm so glad you brought up the thing, why not here? What about these kids, And a couple things there. And I think, the biggest is when we look at where these countries are with regards to their understanding, to their acceptance, and even to their education of people with autism, we estimate they're about 40 years. And actually, we're getting closer to 50. I'm getting a little older. They're about, 45, 50 years behind us. They're where the U.S. was in the 70s, right? And wouldn't it have been nice in that time if somebody from another country could have come in and helped us and gotten us caught up? Wouldn't it have been nice to have that knowledge and they're sharing it? And I think, we say that if there are autism services anywhere, there can and should be autism services everywhere.
What do you see now that you've kind of seen this on a global basis, and you've seen, feedback from developing countries, you've seen the feedback and the issues in the already developed countries. What do you think is the biggest challenge in the international development today for Global Autism Project?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think, I see this over and over again. I think one of the biggest challenges is really sustainability, is figuring out how to build something that's really going to create lasting change. And we've spent the last 13 years, honestly, figuring out how to do this. And I'm really thrilled because, by building a really strong partnership, by taking our partners' lead, by, just listening and being very responsive to their needs and what they need in the community, we've really been able to do this. We've been able to create sustainable change in our partnerships. I think I said earlier, we have a center we partnered with in Kenya. When we started with them, it was 1 teacher and 2 students. And that's grown exponentially. It's not going anywhere anytime soon. And so what that means is when a child with autism is diagnosed in Nairobi, Kenya, they have a place to go. They have resources, their family has support, and more importantly, they have hope. And I think that circles back to the question that you asked, right, about, what's going on for these families? How are they responding to this? And I think the biggest thing is that when you can go into a community and you can share hope and you can create change, lasting change that's really going to impact that community, that's really important.
And what is it that so people are becoming aware, obviously, and there's the World Autism Awareness Month and World Autism Awareness Day. So let's say someone, okay, I'm aware of this and I see the problem, but I also see the solutions that are being put together and the people that are working tirelessly like yourself, putting this together. What is a way that someone can get involved in this? What is it that the Global Autism Project needs? Is it people? Is it resources? Is it money? Is it tools? What is it that if someone said right now, I'd like to get involved in this in some way, in some level, how could they do that?
Yeah, absolutely. So anybody who works in the field, who has experience in applied behavior analysis in autism, we have a program called Skill Core, and folks, all of this is on our website, globalautismproject.org. You can go on that website right there and apply to travel with us as part of one of our Skill Core teams who actually goes in and does on-the-ground training. For folks who want to get involved by supporting the work, we conveniently have a donate button on every page of our website. And absolutely, funds are of course needed. Every week I have a meeting with my director of international programs, and we talk about, our current programs and the programs that are potential, and other folks have reached out to us, and we're getting inquiries on, I would say we're getting about 2 or 3 inquiries a week right now for our services, for training. And the only thing that keeps us from going there is lack of funds. So there is a huge global need. You said the awareness is increasing, and that's an amazing, beautiful thing. But at the same time, that increases the need for the services.
Well, yeah. And I think with, when you're doing things like speaking at the UN, for World Autism Awareness Day, and the fact that the UN recognizes that and has a day and, has someone like you speaking, I have to ask, what's next for the Global Autism Project? You certainly have things on the horizons, and I think your mind probably never stops running around this. Well, what are we looking at next?
So we are looking at Vision 2020. That is 20 centers of excellence worldwide in 20 communities for people with autism. So we have a little ways to go. It's going to be sort of a quick onboarding process here in order to do that. But we've really spent the last 13 years figuring out how to do this in a way that's effective, figuring out how to do this in a way that's sustainable and creates real change. When we partner with the center, and our partnership with them ends, they're in a very different place than when we started. They have trained therapists, they have awareness campaigns, they're typically working with the local government, working with local universities to really create systemic change for people with autism all over the world. So that's what's next, 2020.
Well, certainly, I look forward to seeing what you're doing around there and seeing as you progress through this. Like I said before, I think that the world autism community is very fortunate to have the Global Autism Project. And for me, for April being World Autism Awareness Month, I feel very fortunate for having you, Molly, to come on the show and be able to share this information with folks. So I certainly thank you, and you're definitely a true influencer in my book.
Well, thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it.
Oh, well, I thank you. And again, globalautismproject.org. We'll have a link to that on our show post, and definitely get out there and, see where you can get involved and become more aware and really look around, especially during World Autism Awareness Month and anytime at all. But I think with folks like you, there's going to be some big changes, and not only with the people that have autism, but also in their perception and the awareness and the acceptance of this. And, it really is remarkable. So thank you again for being on the show today.
Absolutely. Thank you so much.
All right, folks, there you have it. Once again, globalautismproject.org. And until next time on Influencers Radio, remember, you are the only real game changer.
You've been listening to Influencers Radio. To get all past shows and updates on future shows, visit influencersradio.com today or follow us on Facebook at facebook.com/influencersradio.